Hi, my name's Mike DeLong. I'm the pastor of the Vine Church. And if you are listening to this podcast or watching this video presentation, this is our special series on race. At the Vine, we believe that the answer to our current situation is not to draw our battle lines, retreat to our corners, and not say anything to each other at all out of fear of saying the wrong thing. We believe that the answer to our current situation is to actually lean in. It's to have the discussion. It's to actually work through the differences in worldviews. It's to talk it out. Now look, when we do that, it's going to be messy. I mean, really messy in places. So as you consume this series, which has one-on-one interviews and panel discussions, you'll have to remember to be grace-filled yourself. For there will be messy moments where you will be offended. Because you see, here at the Vine, we have a pretty multicultural congregation. We have many different people from many different backgrounds. It's just a matter of time until I say something or somebody says something that offends you. We live in a culture that's cancel culture based. Anytime we don't hear what we like or don't hear what we value, there's this temptation just to shut it down, cancel it. I'm going to ask you to suspend that for a moment. Offer grace to all that speak in this particular series. And as we work through this together, let's pray collectively that the Spirit of God would open our minds to the worldview of the other, give us perspective and mercy for the other, and that as we move together as a community, we may not fix the world, but we may become a shining example of how we overcome the differences in worldview through these discussions. This is our intent. Now, here's the deal. I can't control how you're going to react to this. The Bible clearly says in Romans chapter 12, it says, do everything within your power to live at peace. As far as it depends on you, do everything to live at peace. Which means know my heart and know the hearts of those who've participated. We want to promote unity. We want to promote clarity and a biblical worldview. There will be moments when in our brokenness, in our inability to communicate effectively, we'll say things off the cuff that will not be exactly what we hold to be true. But I can't control your reaction. I can only ask you to be mindful, thoughtful, prayerful, and grace-filled as we work through this together. All right, proceed. Love you. Mean it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back for another episode of Pewology, and I've got some good friends here tonight. My good friend Carlus Haynes. Ooh, gosh, I hit that. And my good friend Ebony Mizell. I mean, I know there's another, but I'm just going to go with Mizell.
It's fine.
Okay, good. Okay, and these guys are both working at Haynes and Laurent Law Office, and we appreciate their time tonight to come in and spend some time talking on the podcast just about all the stuff we've been talking about the last few weeks with race and things going on in our nation. So, guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad that you're here. Yeah, absolutely. Glad that you guys are here. Both of these guys are attorneys, and so we wanted to get them to weigh in tonight on some of the kind of the legalese that we've been circling the drain with some of these discussions. I kind of feel like we have a bunch of armchair lawyers that have been talking about legal stuff surrounding a lot of these cases, and I thought we just better get the real deal Holyfield in tonight and get through this. So, have you guys been dealing with, how's it been personally for you, over the last 3-4 weeks with all that's been going on? Is it the topic of most conversations now for you?
For me, it's at least at my home, it's been the topic of conversation since it happened. Because my wife is also a lawyer, and her family lives in West Virginia.
Oh,
And,
okay.
Wow.
They are a little different than I am.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of discussions. But actually, it started back when when Colin Kaepernick was taking his knee.
Yeah.
Some of her family didn't like the fact that she would post the ad on her Facebook account. So race has been.
So there was
a topic.
even tension in the family about some of this stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's been a topic for a few years now, but
I think that's a lot of families, though. I think a lot of families. I mean, you were saying even before, but I think a lot of families deal with, like, I think generally, I'm gonna make this is maybe too much, but I'm gonna push. So I think generally people of seemingly goodwill can have some differences, nuances of opinion on some of these things. You agree?
I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree. I'm waiting.
Why are you so resistant? Why are you coming in guard up? Okay, so you have kids?
I have a son.
Yeah.
He's an adult, so
Is he?
yes.
Has this been a topic with him too?
I've always had that conversation with him since about 12.
Okay.
Knowing that, you get into that age where it's generally acceptable for you to be considered a threat.
Okay.
Even if you're just having fun and being a little loud to people who aren't as familiar with the culture, they may see it as threatening or violent. So, I've had that talk with him. My nephew, he's about to get his restricts. He's 15, and my brother just had a sit-down talk with him.
Yeah.
And so it's something that's been real, in my life, my brother's life. We just gave him the same talk that my dad gave me, probably the same one that his dad gave him, and so on.
Now, I've interviewed a lot of people for this series, and we've done a lot of different individual interviews and podcasts. Almost every one of our participants, especially families and parents that were Black, have said, hey, we have a very specific conversation with our kids, usually around driving time, when they're getting a lot more freedom, right? How was that for you? Are you got one driving yet? You got one driving yet? You got close?
No. So the conversations that I've had with my boys to them, is very theoretical. They don't drive. They've never been in a situation where they've been either challenged or approached by police officers.
Okay.
I've been pulled over twice with my kids in the car.
Right.
And that has been their only experience.
Okay.
So the things about what to do when you get pulled over or if you're stopped on the street by a police officer is just in theory for them right now.
Okay.
So I feel like it's almost going to take a situation for it to become real for them.
Right.
Not that I want that to happen, but that's kind of where it is. I know when I was talking to Aiden about driving, because he just finished driver's ed and need to go to the DMV and get him his learners, but in his mind, he's just like, well, if a cop approached me, I'm not touching anything. Like my hands are on the wheel. Everything you need is in the glove compartment. Feel free. I'll let down the window. You can get it. He's like, I feel like if I do that, like he feels most comfortable. I just don't want to reach or grab for anything. Those are the things that he sees and knows can be problematic.
Yeah.
But
Is that what you told your son?
Most of it.
Okay.
I explained that. Even when you may be right, that's not the
It's not the time.
or the location
Right.
or the right mechanism. I'm
That's
a lawyer.
not the hill to down right there. It's
Call
like,
me,
yeah.
and afterwards,
that's on my list of things to do too.
then we'll deal with it. But
Okay.
but not there. Not I didn't do it, or you stopped me because you profiled me.
Right.
You're not going to win that argument.
Right. Now, okay, so can I ask you a legal question? So if I get pulled over, it doesn't matter. This is for me. If I get pulled over, is the law, and I don't know this, I'm not setting you up, I really do not know the answer to this. So is the law that if I get pulled over, the police officer has to tell me what he's pulling me over for? Or he can just say license registration?
Well, it depends on from a constitutional standpoint, he doesn't have to tell you why he pulled you over.
Oh, okay.
But most departments have policies that train their officers when approaching within that initial dialogue to inform the person why you pulled them over. Now, sometimes they ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? And most of the time you do.
Yeah, exactly.
You were speeding, you were
Right.
leaving, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
I would like to see it become policy everywhere, because if I'm feeling like you've profiled me, but now you give me a legitimate reason why you did stop me, now I may, bring down my anxiety a little bit. You may be a little more comfortable, and now the exchange will go likely trouble-free.
Yeah.
But when you feel like you didn't do anything and the officer's not telling you why he pulled you over, then all of a sudden he's asking you out the car, and you're like, well, what have I done, officer? He's still not answering. Now I can see how the tensions begin to escalate, and most of the time it doesn't end well for the person who's asking the questions.
I don't want to turn it into a law class, but why isn't it the rules or the law that they have? What's the law prohibiting? What's the constitutional protection prohibiting the officer from having to say why he's pulled the person over?
Well, under the Constitution, if the officer has a probable cause to believe that you committed a traffic infraction or reasonable suspicion that you committed a crime, that's all he needs is his subjective, belief.
Okay.
But what we're seeing now is a lot of reform, a lot of people pushing for change, because I think they realize that a little bit of communication goes a long way in those situations.
Right. Okay. Now, so you're saying, so when you had that conversation with Aiden and he's saying, hey, I'm just not going to move, you were like, you confirmed that, you stamped to prove that, you were like, yeah, that's a good plan.
No, what I explained was they're going to ask you certain questions, license, registration.
Right.
Those are things that are perfectly legitimate. The problem becomes when the officer, for whatever reason, may, approach you in a way that may not be positive, or challenge you in some way. And again, very similar to what Mr. Haynes was saying, challenging the officer is that's not something you do at that point. Now, I start talking about, getting out the car, taking you to jail. That's when you call mama.
Okay. See, I've said this a couple of times on the podcast before, and I've driven this home. I tell my kids that all the time. I tell my kids, because my kids are all minors.
Right.
I say, because every school has a resource officer now.
Right.
All these schools. So I tell the kids all the time, you're not allowed to talk to an officer without me present.
Right.
I just tell them, that's the rule, right? Just you say, my dad's not here. Call him if you want to talk to me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Is that okay?
Right.
No, that's perfectly correct. But officers at times, when you don't talk to them, now their suspicion gets even heightened.
Right.
They're feeling that you're a criminal. To them, you're not speaking to me. Well, that's my seal of approval that you did something wrong. Mm-hmm. And again, the situation begins to, to escalate. But legally, you're telling them right. You know that at their age, they don't need to talk to any law enforcement officer, whether he's resource officer or not, without you being present.
Yeah.
And then when you get there, you have every right to say, you know what, we want our attorney.
Exactly.
And make sure you have an attorney and a parent there.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, I'm a fan of First 48, and I keep real particular stats. Only twice have I seen someone talk themselves out of being arrested.
Right.
Every other time, the more you talk,
the worse it gets.
the more they
the
write
worse
down.
it gets.
Yeah. So,
okay.
there's no need to really talk to law enforcement whether you're guilty or innocent, because even when you're innocent, they can take your statements and maybe twist them and use them against you. So I advise all of my clients, my son, every family members, when you're in that situation, you just provide the information that they ask you for, your name, registration, things like that, even your address. But where you're coming from, where you've been. I tell them, don't answer those questions, because that might end up hurting you, in the long run.
Right. Do you guys, are you connected to, friends with, related to any law enforcement?
Well, I am.
Yeah.
No.
No worries. I'm just saying. Okay, so has that been an interesting conversation for you with law enforcement in your family?
Well, my cousin is an officer here in Kissimmee. He's from Illinois,
Okay.
Not far from Ferguson. So his, I'm sure, he could tell you a lot of his own stories, but he's, has challenges every day at work.
Yeah.
He's a big guy too.
Yeah.
But not just him. I mean, I've got my dad was Marine for 25 years. I have many uncles that have been in the military, cousins been in the military, police officers. Just a long history of it in my family.
Yeah. Do you think his perspective, your cousin's perspective, differs from yours a little bit on some of this stuff, the interactions with police? Or does he, as a police officer, does he see it differently?
I'm sure he does.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure he does.
Do you stay away from the conversation because you're worried?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
About nothing.
But in all honesty, I don't necessarily know. I'd much rather have somebody like him on the force.
Sure.
Not only because I know him personally, I know what his values are, but he has a really good way. It might
Good
be a
bedside
size,
manner.
and it could be a size. I think
Yeah.
maybe people just
Yeah.
kind of tone it down when they see him coming. But he has a really good way of de-escalating situations.
Okay.
And I wish that those same sort of tactics were used more often.
Right.
I think they would be very beneficial.
Yeah. I interviewed a couple of KPD officers. I know he's with Osceola County, but I met some KPD officers. And you're right. They said their policy is to announce what they're there for. So they're supposed to announce when they walk up to the window, they pull somebody over there, say, hey, we pulled you over for this reason, right? And then they start the conversation. They went through actually the dialogue that they practiced. It was pretty interesting how they laid out their case of how they dealt with it. And they do a bunch of de-escalation techniques, that they were pretty. It wasn't just like theory, we try to calm it down. It was like, they do this, we do this. They do this, it was kind of more scientific than I thought. You know what I'm saying? I thought it was pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so can we talk about some of the complicated things that have happened? I think there's widespread agreement. I have talked to no one who didn't look at the George Floyd murder and say, no, that wasn't murder, right? I've heard no one in all of these discussions. I have no friends, I have no family that's looked at that and said, I don't know, seems to be some mitigating circumstance. And I know maybe there'll be stuff that comes up, right?
No, there's some out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard people say, well, he was resisting or he had to have done something before the tape came on. And I'm just like, really? Why is it that he had to have versus just accepting that this cop may have gone, beyond what is reasonable.
Right.
But I think that's a society thing that we just have we have a fear that makes us believe that cops aren't bad, that there are no bad cops.
Right.
Or the few that we see are just so in the abstract that it's an anomaly.
Yeah.
Because we want to feel that we are protected. But I just tell Americans, you got to wake up, that it's bad cops out there, and if it wasn't for the advent of the cell phone, we wouldn't even be having this discussion.
Yeah.
Like, when Rodney King got recorded about 30 some years ago, somebody just happened to be out their window and have one of the big old school recorders. But now, fortunate things are happening and people are catching it. But still, for the average American, I think their position is, that was just 1 in a million.
Yeah.
But it's more like maybe 10 out of 100.
Yeah. So let's walk through this real quick. So help me with this, Carlus, because I noticed this happens a lot. This has happened a lot with our panels and the people that we've interviewed. There's a group of people who look at this and they go, okay, they want to look at it through the lens of an individual event. Okay. And then much more in your vernacular, there's another group of people who would look at this as, we would call it whatever, systemic, whatever, a look at all of policing.
Right.
And when that takes place, then they usually appeal to a number of other cases, right? And so even in the last few weeks, we had the Rashard Brooks case, and immediately these cases all get lumped in, or whether it was prior to with oh gosh, I'm going to forget her poor name. Breonna Taylor. So, you have all of a sudden these cases get thrown in together, but they do have different, I'm not saying you don't know that, but they do have different circumstances to them. How do you guys look at them as attorneys? Do you? I mean, it seems like the Floyd is so awful that no one questions it, but these others, it doesn't seem as clear cut. You know what I'm saying to me? The mitigating circumstances are more. Like, how do you look at it?
Well, for me, I go backwards.
Okay.
And I go from the time the person died and keep going backwards to see, okay, should a cop have done something differently at one of those stages that I can now say this man would be alive? And when I look at the Atlanta case, I'm like, okay, this guy's running from me. I patted him down. I know he doesn't have any weapons. I think that the appropriate reaction would have been, okay, we got an APB out. We have his name. We've already run all that.
Right.
We know his address.
Right.
We're going to find him sooner or later and add another charge of resisting officer with and without violence. I don't have to discharge my firearm. So for me, I've had that conversation with people saying, oh, yeah, well, he was fighting the officers. He never should have fought the officer. I'm 100% with that. I agree with that
Okay.
he was wrong. But did that wrong equal his life? And that answer to me is an unequivocal, no, it didn't.
Right.
And so, and I normally end my conversation there, because I know I'm not going to convince anyone. Someone said, well, what if that stun gun was a real firearm? But it wasn't. It was a stun gun.
Right.
One that didn't even have a charge because you had just, tased him.
Yeah.
So it took so much time for the gun to get its charge back. So there was no danger that I could see for the officer to justify, I'm going to fire my weapon, because once that bullet goes out, you're not bringing it back. It's going to hit somewhere. It may not hit somebody, but if it does hit somebody, it normally has ending repercussions. So I try not to even draw that line. The line that I draw is this: and I understand where it comes from. It goes deep. I'm one of those systemic people.
Okay.
That society has learned to accept that an African American man is dangerous.
Yeah.
And we've done it over time with ease, and the bottom line, it is tied to slavery. It's tied to slavery. It's tied to the emancipation, because once the slaves became free, they had to do something to try to keep the newly freed slaves in line, and part of that was creating a fear factor, saying that they're out to rape, they're out to pillage, they're out to plunder.
Okay.
And I don't think that's ever dissipated, because when you see armed persons not of color just get talked down, okay, no, calm down, listen, no, okay, you don't need that weapon, but then an unarmed black man gets shot, there's a big divide there. So I try not to even get into the factual distinctions. Just if at any time you can go backwards from the death and point that if this officer would have acted in a more reasonable manner, the person would be alive, to me, that's it.
So, okay. So what would you say then, and I put your attorney hats on here, like what would you say to somebody who goes, well, wait a minute, hold on. This guy pointed this taser at this officer, and the DA from Fulton County said a week earlier that it was a deadly weapon when those officers pointed it at those kids from Spelman and Morehouse, called it a deadly weapon, and says that it's by Georgia law a deadly weapon. What do you say to that?
Well, one, I'll just say he's dead wrong, because the 11th Circuit, which is where I practice with my civil rights cases, repeatedly say that at least when an officer uses a taser, that's not a deadly weapon.
Okay.
Because I've always argued once that officer tases the individual, that individual now has a right to inflict some commensurate violence against the officer.
Oh, okay.
But
Interesting.
they say that the taser is appropriately used when a suspect is resisting non-violently. And so in order for that to jive with the law, you are impliedly saying that the taser itself is non-violent.
Yeah. Just feels like, well, I'm glad you cleared that up, because it feels like, for whatever reason, that the Fulton County DA is politicizing whatever he's politicizing, because he did say that. And it's
I think he is.
It's like, what the heck are you? Maybe he's trying to get votes or whatever. But it is interesting, because when he said that and then they released that tape, I think the public looks at it and goes, well, you know what I'm saying? I don't know the law. I'm like, so it's like, if he's calling it deadly in one situation and not deadly in another situation, something's going on here. What's happening here? And so obviously maybe that's a case where he's politicizing it, but you're telling us, hey, no, legally this is not a deadly weapon. So when he turns and points it, even in that situation, you think there's good standing here that the court could find, or that the jury could find him guilty?
I do. Now, the first degree, oh my goodness.
That's a charging issue, right?
Overkill.
Okay. Yeah, because he can only, 25 years or life or death. That's all he could get, like minimum 25 years.
That was overkill. Anybody watching that, well, I won't say anybody, most reasonable people watching that would say that the officer was caught in the moment of the scuffle.
Right.
That if he could, I believe that if he could turn back the hands of time, he would have done what I said, we got APB out.
Yeah.
And giving his description, giving his name, giving his address, but just having gotten to the scuffle, seeing the taser pointed, I just believe it was, I can't even say poor training, but officers can't simulate what actually is going to happen. Like, you can give them the book that says when the suspect does this, you should do that.
Yeah.
But you got to be in it enough.
Yeah.
To, the muscle memory. You got to have it happen enough that
it's happened so quick, too. Right. That thing happened so quick, right?
Not justifying it, but I understand why. I know definitely shouldn't be first degree. I probably wouldn't even have charged second degree murder. I think it's a manslaughter. Okay. Heat of passion just happened in the moment.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think the general public goes, okay, something's wrong, right? We know something's off, but then when you do the chart, it's like, I don't know, that don't sound right either. Look, I'm not trying to in any way catch you guys, but I want to get to this because this is interesting. I found this. I want to ask you this because you're the attorneys. So this is good. So what I'm learning in this whole process is that the Supreme Court legal precedent for the protection of these cops is the Graham Law, which is based upon the Fourth Amendment, which is reasonableness, right? And this is interesting because I just find this. I'm really worried about this Rashad Brooks case. I'm worried about what it's going to do to Atlanta. I'm worried about like the whole place going off. Like I think it's going to be crazy. But this is the jury instructions that are given under the Ninth Circuit Court based upon the Graham Law to juries who are deliberating on a cop using deadly force. It says, this is the jury instructions from a judge. It says, under the Fourth Amendment, the police officer may only use force as objectively reasonable. You must judge the reasonableness from the perspective of the officer on the scene, not with 20/20 vision or of hindsight. Mm-hmm. So, like, I hear what you're saying, and it's like, yes, I agree with you, but it feels 20/20. What about for a jury who's saying, you're not allowed to do that? You have to judge it in the moment when that guy turns with that taser after that scuffle. I mean, if that's your instruction as a jury member, I'm thinking there's a lot of jury members who are probably going to go, I can understand that. Yeah,
and you got that from the Ninth Circuit, which is the most liberal.
Oh, is it?
Circuit.
I don't know.
No, it is.
I'm clueless. I don't know.
Yeah, in the 11th Circuit, it's even a lot tougher.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
It's no secret that if you run since 2000, the number of officers that have been convicted for shooting an unarmed black man, I think it's 2.
It's low.
Yeah, it's
very low.
Very low number, at least of the publicized cases. Part of that has to do with, again, we as society believing that officers, just generally they're not going to do anything bad. Right. So we're coming in with that heightened sense of honesty and character. And then when you have jury instructions like that.
And that comes from Rehnquist. That's from his actual verbiage in the Supreme Court case.
And they made that up now. I tell people, anytime I get to argue in front of the 11th Circuit, I take them back to 1871. Okay. Because the initial language dealing with the Civil Rights Act comes from what they call the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. Okay. And its purpose was strictly to take matters out of state court hands into the federal courts because they felt that the federal judiciary would be more fair. Yeah. Then in 62, they just out of the blue said, oh, wow, qualified immunity, that sounds good. Yeah. And then they made it they fortified it again, I think around the early 80s. Yeah. And it's almost impossible to get convictions in civil rights cases against officers, and then even in state law, criminal cases is very difficult. It's
very narrow. I think about the idea of what they're trying to do is get the jury to judge the very moment of the use of force, like almost with constrained to the reaction time of the officer. Right. And granted, I'm pro law enforcement. I have a lot of law enforcement friends. I think they have a tough job. I think they have to make a lot of split-second decisions. I'm sure a lot of those decisions aren't right. But I'm saying when you only confine it to that little window, a typical jury, I think, is many times grasping at straws, going, well, that's what we've been told. That's the only thing we can argue, the only thing we can look at here.
Yeah, it's for me, I would change that instruction and say, if this person wasn't an officer and they were a regular citizen.
Okay. Okay.
And if they acted the same way as a regular citizen would, now you find that officer guilty.
Yeah.
That'll be my instruction.
Okay.
Because that same heightened feeling that we have that these officers are to protect and serve, and they have all this training.
Right.
I need you to utilize that training.
Yeah.
And not act as if I would.
Right.
Because if I was in Atlanta and me and this guy, and I was at the Wendy's, and
Yeah.
we got into a scuffle, and then I had a gun on me and he was running and pointed the taser, I'm probably going to shoot him.
Right.
But I'm not that trained officer. So
Right.
if, for me, again, when the officer acts like the normal public, that to me should raise our, attention. Like as a pastor, people hold pastors to higher standards. So if
Yes.
somebody was arguing with you, and then a bunch of 4-letter words came out,
Yeah.
they're going to be like, pastor. If it's me, they're probably just
They've done
say,
it before.
Well, I'm gonna tell your mama on you, but they would give me a different standard.
No,
So,
I think you bring up a really good point, which is, I've been sending out podcasts to the guys to listen to too in these panels, and one of the things that we've been listening to is the burden of power, right? Is that if you are in a position of power, and the police department is in a position of power, then there's a burden upon you.
Great responsibility.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Spider-Man, right?
Yes.
I mean, we all know this, right? There's a responsibility here with that position that is higher than the general public, right? And I think that somehow gets lost a little bit
Should be
in
the
some
other
of
way
these
around
cases.
almost.
Yeah, in some of these cases. But I don't know. It's tough.
It
I
is.
mean, these types are tough. Okay, so tell me real quick. Give me your 2 cents on the Breonna Taylor case too. Like, give me your 2 cents about these no-knock warrants, about what's going on there. Like, because it feels like it's another one of those judgment calls, right? Cops come in the door, they're executing a no-knock warrant. Let's argue the legitimacy of that in a second, but they're coming in, they're doing their quote-unquote job. Granted, the guy's already in custody, crazy, but
A lot of people don't know that.
yeah,
though.
but the boyfriend shoots first. They empty like
In his
every
house.
clip, you know what I'm saying? And it looks like to the general public, someone like me who does not know the law, these guys are probably going to get off. They're probably not going to get charged with
Right.
this. Do you know
The
what I'm
problem is, well, there's many problems, but no knock warrants, I'm not a fan of.
Right.
It's dangerous. Oftentimes, people who are completely unrelated, children, bystanders, can be hurt. To me, that should be paramount
Right.
to making a drug bust at an ex-girlfriend's home
Right.
in the middle of the night.
Right.
She could have had a daughter, a child, and I just don't understand why they would have subjected her to something like that.
Yeah.
When one, obviously the boyfriend that they were after was already in jail, but more so, not only jeopardized, but in fact killed her.
Yeah.
And she had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing to do with it.
What?
Or you hear about kids that get killed in these
Oh,
same
yeah.
things
Yeah.
all the time. The law is awful
Yeah.
in this regard. And I get it that there was a purpose it was created,
Right.
but her case is not the purpose.
This was created for.
Exactly.
But that involves, think about that. Then it's not in this particular case, right? I think there's two things at play. I think everybody focuses on the police and they're like, okay, these guys, this is bad, and we focus our vengeance of the loss of life here on this police force. But it's bigger than that, because think about it, you got a judge has to sign off on a warrant.
oh yeah.
I know where you were
Oh
going.
no.
on
Let's
Yeah.
talk about the judge,
Yeah.
the state
The whole
attorney,
system,
all of
like
them.
everything has to work together for that moment. It's not just like a couple of rogue cops show up and like, we're going to shoot somebody tonight.
Right.
It's like, hey,
Well,
everything
it's like
worked
the Central
together.
Park Five, how
Right.
there were so many steps in there, so much corruption to put those 4 boys away the way they did.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great example of how the officers, the investigating officers, the lawyers, the prosecutors,
Right.
the judges, all of them worked together to basically take those lives away from those boys for all that time when they were completely innocent. It's not just the officer deciding. You're right.
Is there a lot of police departments that are using no-knock warrants? Because I talked to Kissimmee, they said there aren't.
And boy, people listening to this going to be like, really, Carlus? Because I'm anti-police, but
Right.
It's not the police fault.
Okay.
You might appreciate this, but
Right.
just sort of like my brother, he's a preacher, and he always tells people, don't add into the word of God. What
Right.
it says is what it says.
Right.
Well, when we look at the Fourth Amendment, it says that the people have a right to be secure in their homes, papers, and effects.
Yeah.
Where does no-knock warrant fit into that?
Right.
But the thing that we miss is a lot of the laws that we are governed by happens by appointment of people to one of the highest officers, but it also happens in lower level judges as well.
Okay.
And they start shaping the law in which the officers are to act and react, and how we as citizens have to accept it. But nothing in a no. I won't go to my dad's house after dusk without announcing myself, and I have a key. I mean, I have a key to his house,
Right.
but I have to ring the doorbell and say, "Hey, Mom, Pops, I'm coming in,"
Yeah.
because that's their home.
Yeah.
He has some guns.
Yeah.
I don't want him to mistake me for
Anybody else.
an intruder.
Yeah.
And in this case, it should be the same. And at least the dialogue, and I see some Republicans are supporting it,
Yeah.
that has to go, because it's not backed by our Constitution. It was something that some judges created in order to justify one act, and then all of a sudden it became precedent.
Really?
And now it filtered down to the states. And now, I mean, every agency that I know of, they utilize that. And I don't understand why. If you can't catch them outside going to McDonald's or something like that, that's your bad.
Yeah.
You know, if they're safe in the house, it's unless they live by themselves in there, so you got it under surveillance, and you know for sure that nobody
No one
else is
else.
in that house.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Just wait for that person to execute the arrest.
I think every reasonable person that I've talked to, I've talked to a lot of people in this podcast now at this point. I don't know of any reasonable person, because I didn't know anything about no-knock warrants until I looked at this case. I never even heard the term, right? But I think any reasonable person, after they hear what a no-knock warrant is, has to go, that really feels like a setup. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to bash in somebody's door and not announce who you are, and especially if it's police looking at bad dudes, feels like they're probably going to react negatively, whoever's house you're banging into, and it feels like the police are going to just return it in kind. It feels like it's a setup, like
For them to shoot you.
like an execution. Like, I don't mean it like an execution, but
No,
it's a
you're right.
setup for there to be a gun show.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Somebody's going to get hurt. Most of the
Without
time,
question.
it's an innocent person and not the person that you're looking for.
Like
Right.
in this
But-
case.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, you're serving this warrant, and part of the basis is, well, it's in a bad neighborhood. Makes no sense. So I live in a bad neighborhood. My door's being kicked in, and I don't know who it is. I have to defend my home. I have to defend my home. I have to defend myself. I have to defend my children
Right.
if I have them. So yes, you are creating the violence that eventually, and you're going to be the winner. We know that the police are going to have more guns than the suspect or
Right.
the owner. So at the end of the day, it's a no-win for the citizens. But what I've heard from colleagues,
Yeah.
well, I'm not worried about no-knock warrants because they're not going to execute those in my neighborhood. And that's how
Yeah.
most mainstream America kind of distance themselves
They
from
think
it
it's something
because-
out there. They're
Right.
not going to have
It's
any.
not gonna
It's not
happen
going to touch them.
Right.
All right, so let's switch gears. That's as deep dives as we can go into some of this legal stuff. Even though I appreciate you guys weighing in on some of this, because
No problem.
I mean, I'm ready to go to law school after some of this stuff. I'm like, man, this is crazy.
You
I'm
should.
I'm ready to go, man. I'm ready to go. All right, stamp of approval right there. Mike's going to
Not
law
for
school.
me.
Will you hire me afterwards? Okay. All right. There we go.
We'll hire you.
All right. So tell me from your perspective. You're in the inside of this, looking in from a lawyer. You're in courtrooms. You're dealing with people that deal with this stuff all the time. What needs to change? And don't give me like some big sweeping thing. Give me something to hold on to. What needs to change that you think would help balance the out of balance when it comes to the perceived abuse of police power?
Ooh, boy, okay.
Come on, help me.
The easiest fix.
Okay.
Well, what I think is the easiest fix is it's overstated but underappreciated.
Okay.
It's simply hiring people that look like the people for the area that you are policing.
You've said that. I know you were going to say that. Oh
That's
my
been my
God.
answer the whole time. Carlos, I love you, man. That's been my answer every
That
podcast.
is a simple, and to do that, you have to start, because I'll be honest,
Yeah.
police get a bad rap.
Yeah.
So you got to start putting them into the schools, in the elementary, and letting the minority kids know that, hey, this isn't a bad profession.
Yeah.
Then talk to them when they get to high school on the economic part that, man, it's a lot of retirement you get. The average police officer
Oh, yeah.
retires with close to $2 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then third, I believe, and I know it's going to be a hard sell, but I was this close probably about 5 times from having a serious strike on my record.
Okay.
So maybe we'll have like a one strike forgiveness type policy too, that, okay, if you did something silly,
Yeah.
a little petty theft or something
Yeah.
like that, before you turn 20, we'll forgive that.
Yeah.
Still, allow you to train, maybe have a longer probationary period, but
Right.
don't exclude persons because they made one simple mistake. Have a little forgiveness policy where you can hire more people from the community or people that look like those people that you're policing. And I know for a fact the reactions and the encounters are going to be a heck of a lot better. And that's always a starting point.
I 100% agree, man. I'm telling you, I 100% agree. I told the other guys in the podcast, the moment I realized this, it was a very simple moment. I'm watching the protest the week after Floyd. And you got a white officer there. I think they were in Oklahoma. I'm not sure. White officer, this protest going on. There was a young girl, black girl, on her knees and from just protesting, not doing anything, just protesting, yelling at him, of course. I mean, baiting him a little bit, but whatever. And he literally just took her and threw her on the ground. And then this black lieutenant, obviously somebody that outranked him, snatched him up. Do you know what I'm saying? From behind. And I was like, that's the answer. I mean, the answer is diversity in these police departments. The answer is if you have to answer to your fellow coworkers, right. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If you have to stand shoulder to shoulder with your fellow coworkers and be like, yeah, that was a jerk move, right? And be responsible to them and be able to look them in the eye when you're going into the precinct, I think that's the answer. Like, I agree with you, like 100%. And I think that's what's going on great here in Kissimmee is that when we interviewed those guys, they were like, oh, yeah, we're like one of the most diverse police departments we got. He goes, the guy said, I go on a call. He goes, not only are we diverse racially, he goes, I'll be on a call, there'll be like 4 women cops there. There's like 2 guys, 4 women, and nobody's white. And I'm like, because we live in a highly Hispanic community, you know what I'm saying? And so he said, we'll be on a call, be all Spanish people, and that's fine. But I think that's cool. Now, let me give you my perspective on this. From growing up white, being a white guys aren't scared of law enforcement.
At all.
And let me tell you something else. We're not scared of black law enforcement
At
or
all.
Hispanic law enforcement.
Or getting loud.
Exactly.
And telling them what their job is.
Exactly. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
We welcome that. Mm-hmm. But here's my worry. The black community, we have to admit, has not been exactly like go law enforcement. Do you know what I'm saying? And so it's
But for good reason.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. But we're not like raising up a bunch of people out of the black community who are like, yes, can't wait to be maybe at 5 they want to be a police officer, but somewhere along the way, you know what I'm saying?
Probably by 13.
Yeah.
Because they have had a
Negative experience. Right.
Exactly.
So
And
how do we
it'll continue to
circumvent
go.
that? How do we celebrate law enforcement in this community in a way that says, hey, let's change this from within, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, why isn't, like, for instance, let me give you an example. Like, I was looking at the figures in Baltimore, which is like one of these cities that's a disaster when it comes to like crime, and it's a disaster when it comes to law enforcement. I was telling the guys, I said, you've got a black congressman, you've got a black mayor, you've got a black chief of police, you got a black city council, you've got a black everything. You get to the police force, and all of a sudden it's like 78% white or 75% white or something. And I'm like, what happened? Everybody empowers black except the cops, right? So, like, why can't we get to a place where? How do we do that? How do we get to a place where that's celebrated and we do it? Fix it for us, Carlus. Tell us.
Well, if it were me,
right.
And I know when people hear defund the police, all they're thinking about is, oh, we're not going to get any bullets and no gas in the car. No, that's not it.
Yeah.
They're saying we're not going to overfund you, and we're not going to, we're going to use some of this money for training. Well, I want to take it one step further. Go to the HBCUs.
Okay.
Talk to them about maybe some loan forgiveness and some good salary, some good pension. You can be an officer.
Okay. Incentivize.
Start training them early.
Okay.
Have some good law enforcement officer classes teaching them, a lot of the techniques necessary. Yeah. But some of it's going to be instinctual. Again, if I grew up around African Americans, I understand that we use our hands a lot. So I'm not threatened by that. I'll be talking to them. If I'm an officer, I'm using my hands too.
Right.
Because I understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we eventually are going to affect the younger kids, because they're going to now start growing up. They're going to be going to church with that person, meet them in the supermarket. Their kids will be playing with, the younger kids that's coming up, and then becoming a police officer and law enforcement will start becoming a an admirable thing, but also a profitable one.
Yeah.
Because with that loan forgiveness, it'll make some people change they'll change their mind. On
You
what
can't get rid of
profession
student loans unless you die. That's it.
Exactly.
That's it.
So that's what I would do. Throw some money on it.
And maybe matching the partnerships, like instead of having 2 white cops together, maybe you have a white and a black. Maybe you have a Hispanic and a white.
Yeah.
Maybe you do something like that. So if one officer may be perceiving something as threatening or sees something that, oh, that's off, and the other is, well, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
It could be this. Why don't we ask this question?
Yeah.
Be able to look at the encounter that you're having from a different set of lenses.
Okay. I like that. And I tell you what, I'm thinking as we're talking, here in town, there's a local church here in town that holds I think it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly. I don't know. I haven't been, but they hold a special, I don't know, like law enforcement celebration service. They haven't been doing it since this. I mean, they've been doing this for years. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Where they bring in the police chief and they bring in some of the police officers and they pray over them and they just give thanks, and the community has barbecue with them and all that kind of stuff. Just kind of get to know you kind of thing, right? And it's all different. It's not it's racially diverse. It's not like a weird thing. But can we do that? Can we do that in the black community too? To me, I think, couldn't the faith community come together and go, hey, let's hold up our brightest of brightest and celebrate this and have our young people look at this, and you know what I'm saying? We do that. You know what I'm saying? The predominantly white church down the street, right? That's not the Vine, but the predominantly white, they do this. They're like, we're doing law enforcement night, you know what I'm saying? And they get it. They're like, we want to celebrate this. This is an important part of our community. I think we got to change that dialogue to some extent too in all these communities. You know what I mean? Yeah. Is that fair?
And maybe not limited to law enforcement, like firefighters, EMS.
You sound like you.
I'm just like I have.
Like you got skin in the game. Yeah. No, true. Right. I think they do. I think I think there actually is I think it's first responder service. Yes. Right. Okay. But I just think one of the things they're doing is they're celebrating it. I think we got to get all these communities celebrating this. The Hispanic community here in Kissimmee, the black community, we got to get everybody on board celebrating this if we want to see diversity at the levels we're talking about, which I agree with you. I think it is the game changer. You get that done and accomplished, and I think a lot of this stuff that we see that we kind of either look at and go, oh my gosh, that is unbelievable. I can't believe I just saw that. Or I know something's wrong with that. I don't even know what. You know what I mean? I think that starts to go away to some extent. Right? I don't think it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't fix everything, but it starts to go away.
Yeah, I don't think it'll fix everything, but I guarantee you, because when I say you got to target your communities now, I mean, you can't, I'm not saying put a bunch of African-American officers in a rural country town.
Back in West Virginia.
Right. Not back in West Virginia. But if you place them where there is, cultural and ethnic diversity, you're going to cut down on a lot of the nonsense, because the thing is this. I was telling my partner, if Floyd doesn't die, we're not seeing that. If he just even if just his throat gets crushed a little bit and he, and he's actually, then they have surgery and he lives, we're not seeing this.
No, you're right.
Maybe Minnesota might, but the entire world, our country, we're not seeing it. So it takes a death to highlight what's happening, but it's happening on a less level everywhere, multiple times a day in most communities. So I'm not going to put my knee on the neck of someone who looks like me. Right. I'm still going to arrest you, but I'm going to arrest you with some sort of dignity. Yeah. I'm not going to, slap you and throw you out the way at a protest, again, because you could be my cousin, my niece. I'm going to treat you with some dignity and tell you, hey, you got to keep your distance. Now, I respect your right to protest, respect my right to police. Follow the guidelines, and we're going to have a better dialogue versus if I don't look like you and I feel agitated and angry already that you got me here working these extra hours and I'm thinking you might hit me with a rock. And so I'm already going
Everybody's amped up.
Yeah,
amped up.
Both sides. I'm not the protesters too. They're like, okay, well, you killed this man, so you're probably going to kill me. And everybody is on edge. And I just believe that if it's more people that look like the people that's being policed, it's gonna be a game changer. But Congress got to be ready to put some money behind it. Yeah. They have to find a way to get a big number in now and let that number influence the next generation.
I like your idea too. I mean, I understand we probably have would probably, if we got into the nitty gritty, disagree about some of the defunding stuff. But I like your idea about redirect some of that funding to diversification of these police departments and incentivize these guys financially. Because if we as a community say policing is important, let's value it. How do you value things in a community? You got to put a salary on it, right? And so,
well, think about like education. A lot of money has been taken out of education and redirected into other things. School resource officers with all the school shootings, for instance. I don't know about you, but my school supply list is out of control come the beginning of the year because they don't cover it anymore.
Right.
So when you talk about defunding, there's a lot that goes into that, and it's happened in a lot of other departments like education. So it can be done in a way in which the community is benefiting that we need to look into and not just automatically say, that's ridiculous.
Well, I think for me, the defunding thing is, I think it's a bad slogan.
It is, absolutely.
It's a horrible
slogan.
Agree. And I heard.
I totally agree.
I heard the senator from South Carolina. Who's the black senator from South Carolina? Whatever his name is. But he said the same thing, and I agree with him. He was like, this is the worst slogan ever. Right. Because we're dying on this hill of vernacular. It's weird. But I think the idea of looking closely, look, I've worked closely enough with city government and with county government and church budgets to know there's always money to be redistributed to certain causes, right? And I get that. And I think that that's what the public's crying out for. Right. I think the worry is the overreaction, which what you see in Minnesota. You don't see defund, you see abolish.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think most of the public goes, wait, hold on. Yeah. Who are we going to call? The social workers are going to show up when our houses are getting robbed?
No one is saying that.
Yeah, but no, they are. And
no, I'm not. That's not what I meant by what I was saying.
That's where I get like, well, wait a minute, hold on. Okay, real quick, last we end this.
Oh, hold on, before we talk about specifics.
Yeah.
The officers.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the backgrounds that a lot of these officers have.
Okay.
And the amount of incidents of complaints that have been filed against them. The officers, you'll hear about it. Well, he had 12 complaints, and what's being done about that to stop those same officers either from being on patrol? They'll get suspended for a week. No real, slap on the wrist. What's happening there? Where some of these officers that are committing these crimes have been like literally on a hamster wheel, committing the same sort of acts of aggression, of abuse, and yet they still work. Or even better, get fired and go get hired in another police department, sheriff's office, like nothing happened.
I agree.
I got a big problem with that.
I got to agree. I'm going to agree with this one. So let me lay this case out for you. I think it's interesting what typically happens with all these shootings, especially police-involved shootings, is that it happens, and then 2 days later you get a deep dive into the suspect's background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's and look.
2 days?
Yeah.
Let's try 24 hours.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But you know what I mean? There's always like the second video.
What he did in high school.
How many years has he done?
He failed his.
Right. But here's the deal. There is no agreed upon centralized information on the background of the officer, which I think
is awful.
Is only fair.
It makes sense. And that's probably why it's not there.
Right. But you know what's protecting these officers? It's not the law. And it's not elected officials. What's protecting these officers, and we have to. I know my law enforcement people are getting upset. Is the unions?
Right.
Yeah.
That's what's protecting these guys.
You're absolutely right.
And I think our society needs to step up and say, wait a minute. This union is way stronger than any other union that we have. They get to, either negotiate, how much they're going to make and when they get raises and how their discipline is going to take place. And that's the biggest part for me, in doing these cases and civil rights cases. I'll see a person with maybe 26 complaints, but only one was sustained. And so in trial, most of the time, you only can get out that one. And I'm like, what happened to where there's smoke, there's fire?
Yeah.
You're not going to have all these complaints if you're not doing something wrong. And to ask the police to police themselves, for like me and my brother were talking, it's like very few people like David. They're not going to look inside and say, yes, Lord, it's me.
Purify my heart.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wrong. Give me the hyssop. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So if you got 26 complaints, whether it's sustained or not, it's time for that officer to be off the street, go through. But actually, shouldn't even get to 26. After about 4 or 5, if it's not over a 10-year period, if it's 4 or 5 within a 1 or 2 year period, we need some retraining. We need to maybe even do some psychological exams, try to see really who this person is
Yeah.
and if they are cut out to be, on the force.
And can I
go
say
ahead.
something else while you're on that? I think that there are, and I don't have any stats on this. This is my gut feeling.
Right.
I feel like there are a lot of minority officers who are disciplined in a way that's worse than white officers are.
Okay.
Where you'll get the disciplinary background of, let's say, a black officer that got caught up in something, and he'll have maybe one or two. Take that same department, you'll have a white officer, same amount of time and experience, he'll have 10 to 12.
Yeah.
Now, that's just based on where, like, my work experience and what I've seen.
Yeah.
So ain't got nothing to back that up on. But again, I think it
Fair
falls
enough.
into that. The hiring practices, all of it. There's definitely racism in that as well that has to be acknowledged.
I think that this, it's not apples to apples, but it does resemble the lack of transparency which brought about the same problems in the Catholic Church, right? You've got people in power.
Great example.
And there's no centralized system of like, hey, this is what's happened, or a track record, or there's no transparency.
Push them to another
Yeah.
parish.
I
or-
think it's
Yeah.
identical.
Diocese
I mean, to be totally honest with you, it's identical.
Yeah.
It's a institution that has power, that they're overseeing a group of people, and instead of using that power to weed them out, they're using that power to shield them.
Okay.
Well, yeah, you messed, you did this at this church. We'll just move you to another one, and we know you're going to do it again, but it's no longer our problem.
Right.
And that's what we see with a lot of officers, is that if they don't get a criminal conviction, they're able to just bounce from department or from within their own force, from department to department, or they'll change, municipalities or whatever without any oversight.
I noticed when I took a little bit deeper look at what had taken place, because everybody holds up Camden, New Jersey as the example of defunding, because a couple years back they literally abolished and start over.
Right.
But when I went in and looked at the details of that, it was much less about violence and police power, and it was much more about this union that was out of control. And so what they did was they were like, thank you for the services. We fired all the police department.
Right.
We let everybody go. You know what I'm saying?
over.
And started over without that police union, and it created some controls and some things that helped the community
Right.
have more input into what was going on in their law enforcement. And I don't think law enforcement should be scared of that. I think generally most people want good law enforcement, right?
Of
I mean,
course.
you guys want to be able to call the police, right? And they
Right.
show up and do the right thing. Everybody wants that, right?
That's
Everybody
it.
wants that protection. So we're all pro law enforcement when it comes to that. I think we just want a system that's transparent, that's honest, that is fair, you know what I mean? And I think that would go a long way.
I think that oftentimes you'll have, people get upset because I think your words were, you think 99% of officers
Yeah.
are good. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
But I will say this. There aren't 99% of teachers that are good. There aren't 99% of lawyers that are good.
Nope.
Yeah.
Doctors.
Fair
your
enough.
Customer service reps. 99% of them are not good customer service reps. So
enough.
I don't think you get a pass and get to say that 99% of police officers are good people. It's just not true.
Yeah.
It's not true.
That's
Yeah.
what we want to believe.
That's what, and I do want to believe
again,
that, but it's not
that's
true.
the-
I don't believe it for teaching.
Yeah.
I think that's the hurdle.
Yeah.
I don't believe it for doctors. I
No,
mean,
it's
how
a
many of you have switched doctors or dentists just because you weren't happy with the services they provided?
That's a
We don't get
very,
to do
very
that with
fair
police.
response and a very, very fair critique. I think in a little bit of my defense, I was using a little bit of hyperbole to show the difference between the person I was interviewing and
Yes.
me. But I do agree with you
Right.
that my mindset is to default more towards, hey, benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Right? And I think personal experience may lead others, people of goodwill, to look at the same thing and go, I'm not giving any benefit of the doubt to
Right.
this situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think two good people with good hearts can look at that and have very different perspectives. And I don't think it's always about racism, but I think it's about experience sometimes. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do too.
Yeah. All right, fair enough.
I do think it's sometimes about experience. I
Yeah.
absolutely do. I think, I don't know, what is it, 6 months? I don't know what the training process is for you to, be a yielding a weapon. I think
Yeah.
it's 6 months, something like
they,
that.
They once they go through the academy, they'll shadow someone for a few months, and then, now you're in the line of fire. Don't know if that's enough time, because this is a very responsible position. I mean,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
it's life or death.
Yeah.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah.
Do we put forth the funding to give them more time training, 2 years on the job before you say, hey, you're really an officer.
Right.
You know, I don't, that's what I would do. You know,
Right.
I think as when we lawyers, those of us that do criminal defense work, a lot of times we use the public defender's office, state attorney's office as a battleground. But before that, hopefully they've spent some time in law school in a person's law office, you know, watching and learning how the whole process works. Occasionally some are just right out of law school, no experience, and they get in these positions. They don't last long because, you know, the lack of knowledge and experience and skill shows itself, and then they're out.
Right.
Police officers doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Once they're in, partly because of those unions, they're in, and in every other facet, like when we talk about auto workers, people like unions are bad.
Yeah.
Disney, unions are bad. Police, yeah, man, you know, there you go. Thumbs up for the union. I don't get it. I don't think there's a place for a union in police work, you know, dealing with government money, funds. You know, private sector, that's one thing, but we're talking about people's money because we fund the government, and now we have a union that's dictating, you know, their hours of work, how much they're getting paid, how you can discipline them, you know, the extreme measure it takes to fire them, and even when you fire them, they can come back and get their job. The union's got to go.
All right, so last thought here and last questions. So you're talking to people and friends, and you're on Facebook, and you're trying to power through this thing, and you've got people coming at you from all different backgrounds, and some people are looking at it from different perspectives, and everybody's wired right now. Everybody's like fired up, you know what I'm saying, around the water cooler or whatever. What do you? I don't know how to even ask this. What do you wish people would understand that they don't, from your perspective?
I think first and foremost, the people, it is very, just as we were talking about before, it is very, very difficult for me to listen to someone who's not of my race, has never walked in my shoes, tell me how I should react, feel, or rate whatever the situation is, a situation when they've never walked a day in my shoes, for them to make assumptions about what it means to be black or think that they understand what it means and literally say, oh, well, they should just, wait, where are you getting, like, what experience are you basing that off of? Because I don't know, I'm challenged by that. And
Stay in your lane a little bit.
Yeah, but at the same time, I appreciate the conversation. I don't appreciate the judgment. I don't appreciate the statisticians and everybody throwing like things at me that, well, you know, in this case, or the derailing. Like I'm talking about this specific issue. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about my experience. You talk about Facebook feeds. Something tells me your Facebook feed probably doesn't look like my Facebook feed. We've got different friends. I'm telling you, it's
Probably
a little bit
not.
different. It's a little different. So, my perspective is different.
Right.
Not just even being black, being a female, my perspective. Not even just being a mother, my perspective is different.
Sure.
So I just feel like if people want to have an open dialogue, you got to, take the time to at least try to understand where the person is coming from, as opposed to just making sweeping conclusions about a situation that 9 times out of 10, you've never been pulled over, you've never been challenged by officers, you've never been in a situation where your child has been challenged by an officer, yet now you are, on your podium talking about, well, this is what should have happened, or the stats say this, and I got serious problems with that.
Okay.
But I am open to the conversation, and I'd love to have it. But I just need you to come at me from a perspective of, why don't you tell me how you feel, as opposed to, but shouldn't they do that? And those kinds of things really challenge me.
I noticed that in this whole process, because this is probably our 10th podcast on this particular issue after Floyd, right? And I noticed that the longer we continue to have conversations, we continue to talk, because I think of this as a grander dialogue. In our church, we're talking about this on Sundays. We're talking about this in this podcast when we're having conversations that surround this issue. They spill over into natural conversations. They're not just for a performance. Does that make sense? But I noticed that the longer we talk, I think the more we understand. Because I've noticed that my views have changed even over the 10 times that we've had this, I noticed that like you'll say something and I'll go, yeah, that's really right. Yeah, okay. Hadn't thought about it that way. You know what I'm saying? And like, I think that's why the conversation is so important, right? But I agree with you that sometimes in conversations, people can be jerks or people can say things that are a little.
Do you remember when we were in Honduras and we talked about Tamir Rice? Do you remember that?
I don't even remember.
I remember very well.
Really? I don't
yes.
even, dude, don't bring it up. I don't even know what I was said. I don't even.
But it was a conversation that we had.
Right.
I mean, and it needed to be had, but you said something, it did not sit well. With me.
Yeah.
But by the end of the conversation, I think we were more in tune with each other than we were when we began it.
Yeah. I tend to think that's the deal. I think 9 times
we
out of
went on and on for about an hour and a half.
Were you in the van for so long?
No, yeah, you're right. 6-hour ride.
6-hour ride to the mission. But I was just thinking, what ends up happening, I noticed in a lot of our conversations, because I think we start at very different perspectives most of the time.
Exactly.
I don't know, I can't tell you how many times we've talked about something and we're kind of here, but the longer we talk, the more I think I may not totally be swayed or I may not totally be completely changed, but I notice that the longer we talk, the more I understand.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the more I get where you're coming from and the more I trust your heart on it, the longer we talk. And I think that's the thing.
I think when the way we ended that conversation, I was just trying to say how it's different, obviously raising a black child and a white child, how the conversations are different, how the understanding of how the world is different. And now that you're a foster parent, it's good. There's challenges there. But I remember thinking, I think I said something to you along the lines of, okay, let's say you adopted, and this is, I think right before you, what if you adopted a black child?
Yeah.
With
I had a black placement, I remember early on,
Do those conversations that you had with Ethan or Deacon about as they're leaving the house and, getting ready for their day or driving, do you all have the same conversations? Is there a moment where you have to think, am I doing a disservice for this child by not preparing them for what the world sees when they walk out the door?
I don't know what I said in the moment, but I probably feel like I probably would have said, I'll just let you do it. Just come over, you can come in as a consultant. What would you change? What would you change in this whole thing, just in conversations? What do you wish people would understand that they don't understand?
Well, I developed a mantra over these past 8 to 9 weeks. The first one is sort of like what Ebony said. I tell them, don't tell me how bad my feet hurt unless you walked a mile in my shoes.
Fair enough. That's a good line.
Second, I say, okay, here's the deal. You got to hear me and don't fear me.
Okay.
Just hear me. And for the younger generation of my people, a lot of times the young kids say, feel me, do you feel me? I'm like, well, feel me and don't kill me. If we can take those cliches.
That's pretty good. I feel
now we can have a conversation.
Okay.
We really can have a conversation. And I definitely applaud this setting.
Mm-hmm.
My brother and I, him being a pastor and me being a lawyer, we have a lot of discussion. But he's convinced me that if this movement is going to succeed, it's going to have to do it through the church.
Yeah.
He was like, Christians are the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Period, point blank.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus said. So that you're having this is major. I'm hoping Tim Tebow's out there listening because being a Gator fan, I've been waiting to hear him just, to come out and he hasn't. That's kind of disappointed me a little bit, but definitely the church has to be at the forefront because you got bad seeds in all races. I'm all right with that. But you shouldn't have any bad seeds among Christians.
Yeah.
And if they're taking the lead on the listening, if they're taking the lead on the dialogue, if they're taking the lead on what legislation should we put together in order to effectuate change, I know that change is going to happen. Yeah. For those that's not believers, then I really shouldn't even be having dialogue with you because you're asking someone to change 200, 300, 400 years of what's been taught to them.
Right.
And it's not going to happen. We just saw what happened in NASCAR. They said, okay, hey, no flags. And somebody rented a plane and flew the rebel flag over the stadium.
I didn't see that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, they
come on.
I'm like, so they came out, they made their rule. They said, hey, yes, it's only one, but he's one of ours, and we're not gonna have him in fear. We're not gonna have him feeling uncomfortable. And so they said, okay, we'll circumvent the rule. We're not going to bring our flags in. They had trucks all around the stadium with the flags. They flew them over the stadium. And I really didn't get upset. I said, okay, those people, you're not going to change their minds. So
No, I
let's
agree.
talk to those people who want their minds changed, who want to understand, because I believe enough of those people exist in this world that the change can happen. And then over time, those on the outside, the outliers, they'll fall by the wayside. Their kids will start to learn a little better. They'll become, first, I used to hate this word racially tolerant, but I realized that you got to become tolerant before you become acceptable.
Yeah.
So let's tolerate it first, then let's get acceptable, then let's start loving.
Yeah.
If we do it in that way, I think eventually we'll get to where we're trying to get to.
I love it. That's good. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us for this.
Thank you
really,
for
really,
having me.
thank you for giving the time.
Thank
I
you.
love you guys. That's awesome. Appreciate it. All right. Goodbye. God bless. See you guys. Love you. Mean it.